from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday the 13th. It's actually November 13th. All right, let's go on. We got a lot to talk about today. Our focus, we're going to begin with post-election, living in the aftermath. You're going to be surprised with all the things you're going to hear today. Then we're going to bring up voter fraud. What is that all about? And does it have any significance? And will it change the election down the road? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to tie all that into the spies and the Israelites, an example for us today. This is going to be a very important message. So stick with us as we go through this, and you're going to have a lot of information that you're going to be able to share with your friends. So before we actually get into that, I want to bring up something for those who've been trying to live stream with us. After many weeks of problems with the internet here in New Orleans, Cox Cable was finally, just a couple weeks ago, we're finally able to track where the problems were coming from in their lines. And we had one program that actually went out without problems. Then came Hurricane Zeta. And Hurricane Zeta has messed up everything all over again. In fact, in my house, Audrey and I, we didn't have power for 9 days. And it was 13 days before we actually had cable. So it's just a lot going on right now. So we're hoping this week, so bear with us. If you're watching this program, if you start live streaming with us, please just bear with us a little longer. If it doesn't come up, we're actually testing today to see if we can get it out. But we do want to get back to live stream because this is going to be very important that we stay on top of the news and the information in light of Bible prophecy and end time events. So as we talk about that hurricane, here we are in the Gulf with another storm. This is absolutely amazing. I just received this from WWL radio and TV this morning. It says New Orleans in tropical storm Eta cone makes 8. So if you're looking at that map, you see that we're just barely in it, and it may not come over to this part of the country, but you never know. Just a couple days ago, it was heading over to Florida, and they said it would never make it to the middle of the Gulf. Well, there we are toward the middle of the Gulf already. So it's amazing. Now, what this does, whether people realize it or not, this makes us the most recorded storms in history for the season. We have just passed into a new record for the most recorded storms in one single season, and 8 times for Louisiana. All right, let's get into the rest of the program. On Monday, Pfizer released early data showing that their vaccine is more than 90% effective. In this announcement, they showed positive results on the coronavirus trials. Now has cemented their lead in the frenzied global race that has unfolded at record-breaking speed. And Donald Trump called this Operation Warp Speed, and it actually has put into effect. Now keep that in mind because I'm going to come back to that in just a second. On Tuesday of this week, Eli Lilly has released the antibody treatment gets emergency FDA approval. So they're going to begin putting out their medicine this month. They got one problem, just don't have enough of it yet. The authorization raised the immediate questions about who would get access to the antibody treatments, which are in short supply. Both Governor Christie of New Jersey and President Trump both took this treatment when they went into the hospital, and they turned around very effectively and very fast. Now, here's the rub with all of this. This was known. All of this information was known 2 weeks ago. They would not release it before the election for fear because of the left and the news media was saying that this would be a political publicity statement for Donald Trump. So they held it all so that the Donald Trump's office could not use this, and that's why he kept saying, he says, you're going to be surprised how fast things are going to come out, because they had the information. And the Trump administration held off for one reason and one reason only. They risked the office of the presidency for fear that the news media was going to take the spin on this and put doubt in everybody's mind so that nobody would take these treatments that are available to save lives. How's that for a rub? That's a fact. You look it up. So they risked people's lives for the last 2 weeks rather than putting this into effect because they feared that if this came out beforehand, Donald Trump would have been a shoo-in. So there you are. Go look it up for yourself. Now, let's move on. Post-election, all right, this is President-elect Biden. This is not the first time this is going on. Back in 2000, when Bush ran against Gore, it was 37 days before Gore finally conceded the election. And they went through the same thing we're going through here now. It's not my point to go into the election, pros and cons of everything that's taking place. But there are some very important pieces of information that needs to be brought out, and I'm bringing out in this program, and I will bring it out in another sermon coming up later, and I'll bring this out toward the end of this program when we get into one of our segments. This is talking about the allegations of voter fraud that's out there. Now, there's enough chatter, there's enough information that bringing about people researching this around the country, while one side is saying there is no evidence and the other side there's evidence all over the place. So now, it's not my point to get into any of that. I'm talking about, as always, repercussions of what we have to live with in the meantime. So how much voter fraud, how deep is the voter fraud, and how far and how wide? That's going to be the rub in this area. The problem is, I don't know how you're going to find enough and prove enough in the short span of time that they have to be able to turn, like they did in the state of Florida back in 2000 with President Bush, to be able to turn 4 states. That's what has to be turned now, 4 states. If this happens, if that takes place, this is where I'm going to with this program today. It would take God's intervention and almost a miracle to make that work. Because everyone in every one of those states who govern and watch over the election polls and the counting, the ballots and everything else, they're all in the Democratic states, all of them. So for that to happen, somehow you have to bypass the keepers of the gate to be able to get in there. All right, so you with me? So now let's get into what we're talking about. On Monday, the Trump administration began filing lawsuits. This was on November 9th. They plan to bring enough evidence for the court to begin recounts and even overthrow certain elections because of widespread fraud. Is that possible? I don't know. Up front, right, looking at it from an outsider, I don't see how in the world it's possible, but with God, all things are possible. So why bring God into this picture? Let's talk about that, where we're going today. So what if there is enough evidence? How should we, as God's people, respond at this particular time? Look at Mark 4, verse 22 says, and this is not the only place, there's several places in the Bible. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought to light. Now we know that there are some scriptures who use this pieces of information to talk about at the end time, God's going to bring it all out in the judgment. But it's also used in places for today, that sometimes there's things that happen that God brings to light, and that's going to happen during the times in which we live today. And we'll see some of that as we go forward. What if, this is just a question, this is where I'm going through today. What if God is waiting to see how we respond? What is our response to all of this? Is it so, well, that's the way it is, it's over? Or is there something else that maybe God is waiting for us to do? Look at James 4. He says, you lust and you have not, you kill and you desire to have, and you cannot obtain, you fight in war, yet you have not. Why? Because you ask not. You ask not and receive not because you ask amiss, that they may consume it upon your lust. So my question is that, is God waiting to see that maybe we turn to him and say, God, if it is in your will, is it possible that we have 4 more years before we go into a tribulation type of state of it going into that abyss? All right, so that's where I'm going today. I don't know that I can answer the question, but I'm going to bring about the biblical points for us to consider. So now, 2 examples for consideration. First, I'm going to talk about Abraham in Sodom. Then second, I'm going to talk about the Israelites and the spies of the Promised Land. And then we're going to tie it all into a book in the Old Testament, the book of Esther. All right, so now, let's get into this. Abraham in Genesis chapter 18. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Will I go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Does anyone think that God really doesn't know what was going on? In the New Testament, we understand that not a hair falls, not a bird drops. that God doesn't know everything that's going on. This was written for us to get an understanding of what God was doing and his impact and love for Abraham about what was to take place, and leave a message for you and I. He says, I will know. And the men turned their faces from there, and they went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? See, the response here is that in every case we find in the Bible that God honors a response, when God has made a decision, he allows God's people to approach him in a merciful, humble manner and intercede on behalf of people. Is that what the church is doing today? Because you see, when I'm going to show you this video that I've showed this Catholic priest, he talks about going into the abyss, going to the left, which is the party of death. So here's my point. Abraham knew that God was going to destroy that city and wondered, what about the righteous people who are there? What about them? So now we look at the United States, we're going to go into an abyss, as this priest, a priest of all people said, and going into the left, which he calls the party of death. And that party of death now is moving into position to take control to establish a modern day Sodom. Whether you want to admit this or not, that's exactly what's going on right now. You're in the foundation of the establishment of Sodom and the foothold connecting to the rise of the beast. Now, let's go on. Peradventure there be 50 righteous in the city. Will you also destroy, not spare, for the 50 righteous that are there? So God allows him to lay his case out. We as God people need to begin to prepare to lay our case before God and see what God would do. Genesis chapter 18, verse 27. So Abraham answered and said, behold now, I have taken upon me to speak to the Lord, which I am but dust and ashes. So in humility in the way that he approached, says, look, I'm just dust and ashes. I really don't have a right to ask, but please hear me out. Peradventure there lack 5 of the 50 righteous, 45. So he goes on, and we know the story. So I don't have to go through the whole story to tell you the whole story. We know what Abraham did. God allowed him to approach him, not just one time, but over and over and over again. He allowed him to approach. And so it is with us in the church. When we see what happens and the election is finished, is that the finish? Or could God say, well, let's reestablish this. Let's give the church a little more time and to go on to do his work. I don't know that that's possible, but we're going to go further. Then he said 30. What about 20 people? What if there's 20 righteous, he said? And then he gets all the way down in verse 32, and he says, oh, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak yet once. Peradventure 10 there be found. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. So God let him approach him all of these times. And it's like Abraham's bartering with God to try to get it down, because Abraham understood that this was a rotten, filthy city. And you know, God's people knows that our nation is determined to become a rotten, filthy nation. It looks like we have turned over now that we are greater evil than good, or the so-called good as you can call good in this day and time. Verse 33, so the Lord went his way, and as soon as he left communing with Abraham, Abraham returned unto his place. It reaches the point that you have to ask where we are today. It was with Abraham. In Genesis 15, he says, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in the land that's not theirs, and they shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. But in the 4th generation they shall come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Is it possible that today we have reached the point where the number of the Amorites in America have become full? Have we reached that number today? I'm going to show you a video toward the end where I'm speaking with Governor Huckabee, and in 2016 we were asking, it's possible that God would grant Donald Trump 4 years to give us more time to do God's work. Most people have not seen that part of the video yet. That was saved for a very specific time. We are at that time. I have waited 4 years for something I felt would come to pass, we are there today. I'm going to show you that video today. A special request where I've asked Governor Huckabee to reach the president. So is it possible we're there today, that we have reached that number of the Amorites? So now, let's take a look now. That was Abraham, and we see Abraham interceding to go to Sodom and not destroy Sodom because of the righteous. Did their intercession succeed? No. Why? Because the sin was too great. There wasn't enough there for God to say, I will save that. So he had mercy on Abraham. He pulled Abraham's family, extended family out, and his family, Lot, to allow them to bring their family out. This is important for you and I. Because if God doesn't turn this around and leaves it as it is, we need to pray that God will bless the family, our family's family, so that they can see the truth and come out of this world. That's how deep and how close we're coming toward the return of Jesus Christ. So now, in a sermon I just gave just this past week, we said you had to make a choice. Do you go to Egypt like the spies wanted to go back to Egypt and die, or to the promised land? And in that sermon, I played 3 videos by this priest talking about the conditions and the time that we live today. I'm only going to play one today. In the 3rd video, it's called The Party of Death. So when we look at this video, the first one he says you're going to be heading into the abyss. In this party, he tells you why you're heading into the abyss. Let's play that video.
Okay then, the 5 things that every Catholic needs to know about Catholic Joe Biden. Number 1, Joe Biden is unabashedly pro-abortion. This fact is clear from his long voting record, his public pronouncements, his allegiance to and support of groups like Planned Parenthood and NARAL, and from his party's platform not only in this election year, but in their platform going back decades. He and they support abortion for any reason or for no reason, right up to and even beyond the moment of birth. He and they opposed the effort in Congress to pass legislation requiring doctors who perform abortions to provide medical care to babies who survive the abortion, opting rather to let such babies simply die outside the womb with no care. He and they are pushing for the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, an action which would force all American taxpayers, including you and me, to fund abortions, to pay for them. Along with their anti-life positions on euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, embryonic stem cell research, and other issues, the Democratic Party has become the party of death, and Catholic Joe Biden is their standard bearer. Or as he said in the first presidential debate, I am the Democratic Party. Number 2, Joe Biden opposes the Church's teaching on the sanctity of marriage. While he was vice president, he publicly endorsed same-sex marriage in 2012, 3 years before the Supreme Court ruling. And in 2016, while still the vice president, he officiated over the wedding ceremony of 2 men, posting a photo of the ceremony on Twitter with the caption, quote, "Proud to marry Brian and Joe at my house. Couldn't be happier. 2 longtime White House staffers, 2 great guys," end quote. Number 3, a Biden presidency would be a danger to our already dwindling religious liberty. He and his party advocate for the repeal of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which protects the religious conscience rights of healthcare workers who decline to participate in abortions, and of church-based adoption agencies that choose to place children only with married heterosexual couples, among other things. Biden is also on record committing to restoring the Obamacare mandate, requiring religious ministries and orders like the Little Sisters of the Poor to provide contraceptive and abortifacient drugs to their employees, despite the fact that that is a direct violation of their faith conviction and of church teaching.
All right, folks, so now what we're looking at, if that is the party now who is slated to go into the White House, that will become the legislation of the law of the land, what you just heard, the party of death. That's where we're going right now. A few years ago, in 2016, we developed a special which drew a lot of attention. We called it the Constitutional Christian. And in that special, we brought in Governor Huckabee, and we had an incredible, just an incredible time with the governor. So in that, we asked him a couple of questions. There's two videos I want to play for you today, talking about some of the things and the times that we were moving into in 2016. One of them you've heard already, a little bit of, which I'm going to play, and then the second one you probably have not heard. Let's play the first video for the setup for what I want to talk about in this segment. What hope can we leave an audience with coming up, beyond just an election? What's coming up? What do you think we should be doing now as a nation? Because here's what I see, what you just said. There should have been, every pulpit in this nation should have rallied. There should have been 2 million people on the steps of the White House saying, we will not stand. You have just separated us from our covenant between us and God as a family, and we will not live by those laws. And nothing was done. It is what you just said from before, it's the law of the land.
Well, when the pulpits surrender, it's not that surprising that the politicians will as well, and the corporations. Look what happened on the day of the Supreme Court decision. Within minutes, now think about this, within minutes, virtually every major corporation in America put up a website with rainbow colors celebrating the decision. Now, why did they do that? Why would PepsiCo, for example, they sell soft drinks and snack foods. Why would they celebrate same-sex marriage? Because there was pressure from a militant small group whose loud voices made them surrender to this notion that that's what they should do. So you had the biggest corporations, including Coca-Cola and Marriott hotels, there were very few exceptions, that were putting immediately, and then you had the White House all painted in rainbow colors. How'd they get away with that? Because the Christians, and so fast, because the Christians were silent and the pulpits were silent. And if they weren't silent, they weren't respected because they just weren't taken seriously anymore. The net result is that you had even Christian pastors and so-called, I won't call them leaders because they're not leaders, they're followers. As kids, we called them fraidy cats. But even saying, well, it's the law of the land. It's time to move on. No, it's never time to move on away from God's law. But that's what we've ended up doing. Let me just mention this election this year. I think people get caught up in the politics of Democrats, Republicans, and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Put all that aside and ask this one question. Is there a way that we can preserve this republic? Neither of the candidates we elect are perfect. Both have extraordinary flaws. They've done and said things that we can pick to pieces. It comes down to, is there one more likely to appreciate, respect, and preserve the constitutional form of government we have? Or is there one that would decide that he or she could throw out those laws and be a law unto themselves? And that should be the decision that Christians make. For me, that's a pretty easy decision. One of the candidates wants to get rid of the Johnson Amendment, recognizing that it itself is not the problem, but all that it has helped create has become a huge problem, and to preserve and protect religious liberty as a foundation of all of our liberties. The other believes that the power of the presidency is such that one can dictate and create law out of thin air, bypassing the Congress, and impose the singular will of an individual against the elected representatives in our constitutional republic, it gets pretty easy from there.
And frankly, the outcome could be the difference also, is that not only has it become the accepted law of land, it will also become the legislative branch to attack those who don't agree with that policy.
Yes.
And so, and the ministers that I oversee and work with, I let them know that there comes a time, if this doesn't change, the stance we take in the pulpit, they will find themselves in jail.
People didn't think that could happen, but I went to Kentucky and went there to go see Kim Davis, who was put in jail for following. Oh, I did. It hurt me politically, but I would do it again today in a heartbeat, because to me this was an interesting thing where by the way, a Democrat elected official, a lot of people, the press never wanted to point that out, that she was a Democrat. I didn't care what her party was. Here was an elected official who was elected when the Kentucky law was explicitly clear that marriage was between a man and a woman, who did not want to violate her conscience as a Christian, nor the law of Kentucky, the only law that the people who elected her had given her, and didn't want to violate that by issuing same-sex marriage license. And a judge decided that he was the law and ordered her placed in jail without bond. Now, keep in mind that John Wayne Gacy had bond. The Boston Strangler had bond. Kim Davis did not. And I wanted to call attention to the fact that for all those smug Christians sitting out there saying, well, this is really none of my business, the day when they come and take your pastor and put him in jail because he dared preach that same-sex marriage was a violation of God's law, the day that he was put in jail because he wouldn't perform a same-sex wedding, then what are you going to say? You know what? On that day, it's too late to say anything.
We have now reached that point that you saw the concern from 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the election that brought in the president protected our freedoms as a Christian church, a very conservative Christian church, mind you, with Christian and godly values right out of the Bible. Till now, the election has moved into where the left is going to begin changing laws to be able to take away those protections and those freedoms. The Bible talks about that. We're going to go into that in the second half. But before we do, there came a time in that interview that God put in my mind, in my heart, that impressed upon me that we would reach this time during this presidential administration in his governing. I asked Governor Huckabee for a very special request. Let's play that request now. Bring this to a close. I have just one question, and I need a little bit of a lead up, because I want to leave you with a question of conscience, because you're a man who does not violate conscience or compromise your standards. And that is why I prayed that God would lead you to our program. And how he did that is a marvelous story all in itself. Because I want to ask you to think about something that may come up in the future. And you may be the only person that I know who could actually bring this to pass. Is that kind of laying it heavy on you here?
That's laying it heavy.
It's laying it, but I mean it with all my heart. Is that I believe that if Hillary Clinton gets in, she's already said she's not bringing religion, she's not bringing church, she's not bringing God into government. Our days are numbered. When I look at Donald Trump, I see a man who's not afraid to challenge the status quo. I also see a man that in times is a man of compassion and great love and mercy for the wounded, the injured, the people who really need help. My hopes are, if God puts him in office, the highest office of the land, when I look at all this history, my hopes are that you would probably be one of his advisors on the highest office of the land. What you bring with you is a standard that's not been seen in the White House in a long time. Donald Trump will find himself at a crossroad at some point that only God can get him out of to help this nation. Here's what I'm going to ask you now. If that comes to pass, would you at least contemplate, because that's something that I want to put in your conscience, that you would go to him and ask for him to have our nation call them to God for a day of prayer and fast, to turn our hearts to God, to restore this nation? Would you consider doing that?
Oh, absolutely. And in part because it would be easy to say that up until the most recent presidents, this is how American presidents have always reacted to a great national moment of crisis. Every time, it's how we've reacted until the most recent of days, and the consequences of not invoking God's presence have been disastrous.
And the reason I asked it, because you see, around the government offices is very little bringing God in first. I believe that you would bring God in first to decide those decisions. And there may be others, but my prayers is that God would bring you to that stage, and that gives me hope. Because see, in Amos 5, we're going to close our program out in Amos 5, because 2 years ago I said we have no hope for this nation. I'm on radio programs and I'm traveling around the country, and they asked me, you think there's any hope for America? And I said, no, I don't think there is. I think we've gone too far. But when I've seen what's going on the scale right now, I'm thinking maybe God will give us one more chance. But what God does is he puts people around that has that spirit, the constitutional Christian, that can lead and guide this nation. And so with that, I'll leave that with you. I hope that that will stay in your conscience. Consider me like Joseph. I'm in this prison, and you're the butler. And so at some point, God will bring to remembrance, this guy Tom put this nagging thing in my head that I've got a mission. And I pray that God will give you that mission, that you may be the person to help steer this nation to the highest office of the land, to bring us back to God. Because Amos 5:13 says this, if they turn to me, he says, I might just have mercy on that nation. And so now I'm saying, maybe there is hope. And I'm sitting at the desk with the person who could possibly bring it to that land. Governor, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom. Honor to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
All right. Well, God gave us 4 more years. And it may be that was our last 4 years. I don't know. But I'm going to follow through what you just saw in that video. And I'm going to remind Governor Huckabee, and probably even send him that little clip as a reminder, and ask him that maybe he would approach the president, and I'd be honored to go with him if we had that opportunity, to approach the president, that he could call for all of those who voted for him to support him, that if there is the election fraud, that God would bring to light enough to be able to turn around to give us 4 more years. Will that happen? I don't know. But I see enough evidence in the Bible that we must at least try. All right, now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we come back. So let's take a little bit of a break here. We're going to bring out a very short video. It's only about a minute long. It's called, What on Earth is Happening? I'll be right back. Video, huh? A lot said in 1 little minute. Wow. All right, now let's get into the second portion of our nuggets. This is the nuggets portion today. And we're going to talk about the spies and the Israelites, an example for us today. You're going to find there's a lot of information God left there that's really just coming to light how important it is in the times that you and I live today. Numbers 13, verses 27 through 30. So they told him, we came into the land where you sent us, and surely it does flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Remember the story, how they carried a cluster of grapes? There's 2 men to carry 1 cluster of grapes. He said, man, this is a rich, rich land. Nevertheless, there's always a nevertheless. You know, you and I, when sometimes God gives us understanding and insight, you get all excited about what it is, and then you got to realize, like, whoa, if I do this, all of a sudden you begin to let the neverthelesses come into your thoughts and say, nevertheless, if I do this, it could cost me. So that's what the people did here. Nevertheless, the people that dwell in the land, the cities are walled. The peoples are strong, they said. They're great. Moreover, we even saw the children of Anak, that they were giants. They were the children of the giants there. And the Amalekites that dwell in the land, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites that dwell on the mountain, and the Canaanites by the sea and the coast of Jordan. These are warrior nations. These are warriors that are there. They come out of the wilderness. They come in the desert for 40 years. They're not prepared for any of that. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we're able to overcome it. Now remember, this is the first generation. They're out in that wilderness for that little period of time to go in. They saw with Egypt and how little control they had back there. So now they got to go in. They're going to take over this land. They wasn't ready for it. The neverthelesses controlled them. What about today? When we see what's going on, when you hear the left side, we're going to change. We're going to begin to change the Constitution. We're going to begin to change the number of states. We're going to begin to change the Supreme Court. God says at the end time they would seek to change laws and times and seasons. You're looking at what they're telling you they're going to do, and you apply that to biblical prophecy, and it ought to terrorize everybody of what's coming. The nevertheless. So here we are as a church, trying to address that as we move forward. So now, let's go to Numbers 14. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and they cried, and the people wept all night long. So the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, and would that God had allowed us to die in the wilderness. Rather than go into the promised land and trust God, they said, look, we just as soon die. We should have just died in the wilderness. We should have just died in Egypt. Why are you putting us through all of this? That's an amazing revelation when you think about what we're looking at here. And therefore, the Lord has brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey. Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us make a captain and return to Egypt. So in that sermon I gave this past Sabbath, I hope you'll get it. It's called Choose, Egypt or the Promised Land. We are at that stage right now. You can choose in your mind to go back to where you were, to live in the safety and the comfort of this world, which isn't going to last long. This new media frenzy now and this joy that you see and the euphoria, the joy that's running out in the streets, that's not going to last long. It'll be gone very, very quickly. Or you can buckle down, trust God, and get ready to go to the promised land, the millennial kingdom with Jesus Christ. So Moses and Aaron, they fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation and the children of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were there to search the land, they rent their clothes. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. And they spoke to the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord was with us. Fear them not. This is the mindset that you and I, and all of God's people, in all the churches, they need to lock down this in their mind right now. Because you see, God is with us, whether he changes this election or not. You and I, just like Joshua and Caleb, are going to the promised land if we hold fast to what God has given to us and do not succumb to the wiles of this world, because God has already given it to us. This world is going to be destroyed. Now, they think they've won a victory, but they've not won a victory. So whether God gives us 4 more years and overturns what's coming or not, we are moving to the promised land. And we see that in the story. Now, there's more about this story that we need to pick up now and talk about that applies for you and I today. So all the congregation bade them with stones. They're going to kill them. What do you think is going to happen with you and I when we tell people that, no, you can't follow what they're doing? This is evil. Well, we know it's going to happen because we see it. There's coming a future martyrdom. The two witnesses are going to be destroyed. They're going to be so angry, they're going to throw parties when they see them dead in the street, rejoicing, dancing around in their bodies. That's coming. It's real. So they bade them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation with all the children of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people provoke me? And how long will he be ere that they believe in me for all the signs which I showed among them? I will smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a greater nation and mightier than he. Now here, let's get the picture of what's going on here. God said, I had enough. I'm not going to deal with these people anymore. He had said, these 10 times have they rebelled against me. He says, I'm not putting up with them anymore, Moses. I'm going to destroy them all, and I'm going to work with you. That's pretty powerful, what God was saying there. I mean, Moses, imagine what Moses in his position would have been. But look what he did. Moses said to the Lord, the Egyptians are going to hear about this. He said, they're going to say, he brought up this people in the might from among them, and he goes on, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of the land, for they heard that the Lord art among this people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and that your cloud stands over them, and that you go before them day and night in a pillar of a cloud and a pillar by fire and by night. Now, if you kill this people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame will speak in saying, because the Lord was unable to bring this people into the land which he swore to them, therefore he has slain them in the wilderness. He said, listen, it's going to bring dishonor to your own name. He didn't sit back and say, okay, we'll start over. Moses was tired of those people. Remember, so many times he'd go to God and he said, listen, God, your people, remember, he said, your people are doing this. And God would turn around and say, not my people, they're your people. Nobody wanted them. Finally, God reached the point and said, look, I'm sick of them. I'm going to kill them all. I'm going to start again with you, Moses. And Moses said, no, you don't want to do that because you see it's going to dishonor your own name. What am I looking at? Moses interceded on behalf of the people. That's what you and I need to do right now. On behalf of the people, we know that there's an innumerable multitude of people that God's going to call. We're asking, and the reason to approach Governor Huckabee, to approach the president, is not so he can stay in power, but to give us more time to preach God's word so that more people can be saved. That's the whole purpose of all of this. And it may be, like with Abraham, it's too late. There's not enough there. I don't know, but we need to try. We need to try. So now, Moses' intervention. Now I beseech you, let the power of my Lord be great, according as you have spoken. The Lord is long-suffering and great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generations. Pardon, I beseech you. So he lays out his case in humility. He's speaking with God face to face. So God, don't do this, please. He says, pardon, I beseech you, the iniquity of this people according to your greatness and your mercy. Isn't that what Abraham did? That's exactly what Abraham did on behalf of the people. Like, are you going to destroy? What if there's 50 or 45? What if there's all the way down to 10? God knew there weren't even 10 people there. But he let Abraham go. Why? Because he wanted to know how far Abraham would go, pleading his case of mercy for the people. Is it possible, I asked you at the beginning of this, is it possible that God's waiting to see what our response will be? How far we will go to his throne to be able to reach the people to pardon their iniquities, to give us more time? I think so. I think that's where we are today, that God's given us opportunity to reach him. Whether he will or not, it doesn't matter. What God is waiting to see how we respond to what the situation we are in today. That's what's important where we are today. I pardon, I beseech you, the iniquity of this people according to your greatness and your mercy, as you have forgiven this people, the Egypt, even until now. And the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. Isn't that amazing? because of Moses pleading his case before the throne of God, but this time face to face with God. He saved that time from killing all those people. But of course, we understand the story. Even in God's mercies, I'm not going to kill them right now. He said, but they're not going into the kingdom. They're not going to the promised land. So what I'm saying now, that those, even if God grants us a pardon right now of the iniquities and reverses this election, He gives us 4 more years, the people, unless they repent, are not going to the millennial with Jesus Christ. But it would give us time to do more work, to possibly save more lives. Now, let's begin to wrap it up and bring this to a close. I have no idea where we are on time, so I wasn't even paying attention to that, but the story today is too important for time. I'm going to close now with the book of Esther. This is the book of Esther. It's a longer story than I have time to bring into, so I'm going to give you a quick wrap-up of Esther. I'm going to go through just a couple of verses that are important for you and I today. Just like we've seen with Abraham and we saw with Moses, Esther also intervenes on behalf of God's people. Esther is described in all versions of the book of Esther as a Jewish queen of the Persian king Ahasuerus. In the narrative, we understand that Ahasuerus was sought a new wife after his queen Vashti refused to obey him, and then Esther is chosen for her beauty. The king's chief advisor, Haman, is offended by Esther's cousin and guardian, Mordecai. He's offended because Haman is put in power and authority as the greatest prince of all the princes in the region under the king. And he demands respect of the community, and he doesn't get it from Mordecai. Mordecai refused to bow to Haman and show him the respect that he thought he was due. It infuriated him so much, he was going to kill all of the Jews. That is what's left at the plate of Esther, that God inspires her to do a work. I'm hoping that maybe what God put in my mind from 4 years ago to ask Governor Huckabee was the case that maybe we could intercede like Queen Esther on behalf of God's people for at least 4 more years. So Haman is offended by Esther's cousin and guardian, Mordecai, and he gets permission from the king to have all the Jews in the kingdom killed. He's going to kill them all. But can you imagine the rage that's going on now? When you look at what's going on out in the society today, where we are today, there's rage going on. Do you realize that the left, there are many, many people, even congressional officers, who are beginning to make a list of all of those that they hate to begin to give retribution over the next 4 years. Oh yeah, it's out there. They're not even trying to hide or deny it. It's there. We need to make a list of all those who said these things, and they are saying, go get the accounts, their texts before they're erased, so that we can use them to go after them for retribution. That's taking place today. Right now. And the news is not reporting it, but it's there. It's actually there. So Mordecai gets permission from the king to have all the Jews in the kingdom killed. But Esther foils the plan. He wins permission from the king for the Jews to kill their enemies. So everything is reversed. Do you realize that if God intervenes, there's no way that the president can say he did it by his own power and might? This would have to be admitted that it is God that brought this about, that God's name would be glorified in the power and the magnification, that everything would be reversed upon the enemies, just like it here in the book of Esther. You see all the things that are lining up right now? Why it's important that we at least try in our prayers before God. So now, I'm going to begin to close it now with, in chapter 4, the intervene to save the Jews. Just a couple verses, because this is important for the day you live today. So Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdom, and their laws, let me repeat that, and their laws are diverse from all the people. They catch your attention? Or not, we in God's church, in our laws that we obey, which supersede the laws of man, are they not different? See? Scattered amongst, we're all like salt and pepper scattered amongst the people. Remember what God says in Daniel? He said he would scatter the power of the holy people. Or not our laws that we obey, the Sabbath day, the commandments, all that God says that we are to do, his holy days, our laws of clean and unclean food, are not our laws different than the nations? Absolutely. He says, and their laws are diverse from the people, and neither keep they the king's law. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. So no, it's enough. They said, get them out of the land. That will take place in the years ahead, if everything stands the way it is. So it says, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasures. So here he bribes the king. He says, I'm going to pay the money. We're going to kill all these people and then bring the money into your treasury, O king. Can you believe that actually happened? When you look at the book of Revelation and the prophecies of Ezekiel, Isaiah, and all the minor prophets at the end time, it talked about Babylon and all the nations who became rich with Babylon, talking about the rise of the beast and the power that they're going to have. You're looking at that. You have seen right now the foundation of the beginning of that rise in this nation. And if you can't see it, then you need to go to God and ask for wisdom to be able to understand what's actually taking place. That is where we are today as a nation. So we had the special request for Governor Huckabee. If he was elected, if there ever came a time that the president would fix the problem, would you? And you heard that video just a few minutes ago in video 2. Video 2. The truth is, God gave us 4 more years, and the sins of our nation have only increased. The LGBTQ is on a pace that cannot be stopped. They call repentance in Washington by the Christian communities but a blip in the past. Remember that great repentance that we were supposed to have just a few weeks back? It came and it went and it's gone, and the nation's never changed. 2020 has left many in the nation's largest city in a state of wreck and ruin after the protests and the riots and the burnings and the lootings and billions of dollars in losses for all those businesses. The weather of 2020, COVID-19 and the anger that was across the nation prevails. And now the nations around the world are rejoicing that the problem is over. To make sense of it all, where might we be in the course of these biblical events? It does feel like that is in the time where God was destroying Egypt and Pharaoh's anger continued to grow. And God said he would harden Pharaoh's heart, that he will not let you go. And so we're seeing now the left supporting the anger. AOC just brought out that she's making her list, the post of the Trump sycophants to face backlash. And look what she wrote. It says, anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? Their complicity? I foresee decent probability of many deleted tweetings, writings, and photos in the future. She's saying, listen, we need to get evidence to be able to go against these people in the future. Now, that's in writing. So now let's begin to close this. We do have a great high priest, and it says, a high priest that is passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold our profession, for we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all point tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy if Okay. All right, in Hebrews 14, verses 14 through 16, we says, seeing then, no, all these things that we have, then everything I've been talking to you today, seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling and of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we, yet he was without sin. Let us come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace and help in the time of need. We need to do that, brethren. Very humbly go before God's throne of grace and mercy and ask for his protection, his guidance, and his wisdom, whatever his case may be, so that we will follow his will, not ours. So Ezekiel, we talked about when Ezekiel in the first 4 chapters, it's called the writer's inkhorn. Now, I don't have enough time to go into these, but I put them up here so you can freeze this video, go back and take a look and read these. But I do want to bring out verse 4. So the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that cry and sigh for all the abominations that be done in the midst. As God waits for our response to where we stand, as we come before his throne of grace, so he can understand where we're coming from, that whether he does or he doesn't change anything at this point, that he will put a mark to protect all of us, all of God's people, whatever organization they're in. It doesn't matter to God. It's in his organization, his organism of the body of Christ is what's important, that he will protect all of those from all the abominations. And then the final scripture, as we begin to close to wrap it up, as we end it with Governor Huckabee, I want to end today with this. In Amos 5, verse 15, hate the evil, love the good, and establish judgment in the gate. And it may be, we don't know what God will do, but it may be that God of the Lord, God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. That is you and I. That's where we are today in the post-election of the presidency of the United States. All right, from the home office now, let's close it down and see what we have here. And this was from last week. This went out Clayton Evans, and God Never Fails. The Age of Lawlessness was a sermon I gave just a few weeks back. If you haven't got those, be sure to get on the mailing list and get them. We also sent the newsletter that went out, and this month's offering 2020, Is This How It Begins? Very important. Also from the website, we also put 10 more sermons that were added to the YouTube and the Facebook page. So there's tons and tons of information that there's out there by the various ministers and speakers from the churches around the country. By all means, go to the website and take a look. All righty, as we do every single day, I know there's a lot of information here today. It's very important information, but you really needed to hear it because we're at that time. You know, we're at the time where the Bible is just not the Bible. This is the Bible, a time for our day, the end time for you and I. So in this final sermon, we're going to call Shine for Him. And I'll be right back to close the program. Well, that's it for our program today. As you see, there's a lot of information. Now, I hope you'll take it to heart, go back and look at this twice. Share this with everybody you know in all the churches. This is very, very important with the time we're living today. We need your help to get this information out. Can't do it through the media today. They want to censor everything that goes out on the far right. So it may be that it'll be God's people who will begin to continue the word now, where everything else is being censored out. We will move into the time of the famine of the word. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for supporting us, for taking the time to watch the program and send it with everyone. And as we say every single week, be sure to share it with everyone you know. We're going to love you for it. Maybe not. Till next week, God be with you.